Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie, broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on TikTok. Folks, please do send in your greetings. Tell us where you are viewing from on this sunny evening in the United Kingdom. We have got a great guest coming up, as always, at the bottom of the hour at 7:30. We've got Ash, that Preston journalist, who is a favourite on the show, and we'll be speaking to him for 20 minutes. Now, if you're on TikTok, you won't see that interview. You'll need to go to youtube.com/UK A Force for Good. But everybody else on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Twitter will see that interview. Now, we're going to be talking about several things tonight. First up will be a report on our Coronation Street stall in the great British city of Glasgow last Saturday. Then we're going to be talking about this amazing YouGov poll which has come out, which shows that the SNP are likely to get a tanking at the next general election. And we're going to be asking, what does that mean for the country? And what does it mean if we are now really going to have to take seriously the prospect of a Labour Party government in power? What are its plans for the United Kingdom and the Constitution of the United Kingdom? Well, thankfully, because it's my job, I've been reading exactly what their plans are, because they've laid them out in this document. And as we always say, Labour will do this. They'll do this. So what is it that they are intending to do? Listen up for all of that. Some of it is, what you can expect from Gordon Brown. And, of course, at the bottom of the hour, we will also have our On This Day in British History. So let's say hello to some folks tonight. First in was Derek Hart, saying hello to fellow Brits around the world. Finally, we're getting some decent sunshine, aren't we? Just, it feels summery. It feels summery today. AR Entertainment says England and Wales is warming up while Scotland is wetting itself. Well, not here in Glasgow, I'm glad to say. It's nice and sunny. Derek's pleased to see Ash back on tonight's show. And here's Debbie to say good evening, Unionists. Good evening to you, Debbie. Derek says hello to AR Entertainment. And Derek, I think you recognise the t-shirt, by the way. You know what I'm talking about. Hi also to Derek Hamilton from the great British village of Armadale. Lovely little place is Armadale. And hello to Kat and to Stephen and to Adam, who is watching on from the heart of the great British state of England. Hey to Melissa and to Paul from the Garden of England, and to Catherine and Stuart from Elgin, and to Rita. Nice to see Rita in the house. And to Pip Osaurus from Dunfermline, and to Alan from Dundee. Great crowd tonight. JP says he'll be voting Reform. That's the party Reform, because he's sick of all these parties with their lies. Time for a complete change, says JP. Hello to Pauline. JYGO says, imagine wanting to be ruled by the English. Well, we want to be ruled by the British. That's the Unionist position. We're ruled by the British because Scottish, English, Northern Irish and Welsh together represent the British, and we actually have a parliament for the British people, which is currently based at Westminster, but it doesn't need to be based in Westminster. but it currently is. And that's the British Parliament. It's not the English Parliament. Paul says, Labour should renationalise the railways, but would they be able to include Scotland's railways in this? They would need to override the power that the Scottish Parliament has at the moment on that particular matter, because transport is a devolved issue. So they would need to override that power, which they would be perfectly entitled to do, and in fact, no doubt would get a lot of support from many people in Scotland for that particular policy. It wouldn't cause any British government that did that much hassle, I don't think. Not in Scotland anyway, where there's long been a kind of demand for that. I don't know if nationalising railways makes much difference one way or the other, but I know that some people do call for that. It may be a good policy, I don't know. And Adam says, can 2024 come quickly so we can kick the SNP out? Well, let's go straight to looking at what happened today. We woke up to these couple of front pages. The front page of the Daily Mail said, SNP faces losing 21 MPs at the next election. 21 MPs. The National, what did it say? Poll warning for SNP. Mary Black and MacDonald among those said to be at risk, as survey, that's the YouGov survey, suggests party could lose 23 seats to Labour. Now, just before we look at the details from YouGov, what's up there at the top? Let's put that back on. Exclusive, Riddoch to tour Scotland with new indie book. Do you know what? These people, they always write a few words. They'll always get a publisher in Scotland to print their tripe, and then to actually arrange a speaking tour. That's irritating, isn't it? Touring Scotland with new indie book. Crying out loud. Okay, I just want to comment on that. I mean, if I wrote a book, do you think there's going to be any publisher in Scotland that would touch it? I don't know of any books. Well, I do know of a couple of Unionist books that were written, but they weren't published in Scotland, even though two of them had Scottish authors. There's no Scottish publishing companies would put out a Unionist book. It's that whole Scottish publishing is completely controlled by this people who are sympathetic to Scottish nationalism. But what that means, though, is that if you're a Scottish nationalist, you will get your book published, regardless of its usefulness to society. Anyway, thankfully, we've got such a thing as self-publishing, which is one way of avoiding that. Now, let's go on to this YouGov poll. Let's look at the figures here. Now, this is if an election were to be held tomorrow. Now, tomorrow there would be 59 MPs, although as it actually happens, at the next general election, there's going to be 57 MPs because boundary changes are going to reduce it by 2. But this is if an election was to be held tomorrow, the SNP would lose 21 seats. They'd be down from 48 to 27. And Labour would be up from 1, which is what they've got at the moment, to 24. The Conservatives would lose 2 and the Lib Dems would stay on 4. And there, in that diagram, you see where the Labour seats would be, and it's all in the so-called Central Belt, including Glasgow, where Labour is predicted, by this survey, Labour is predicted to take 6 of the 7 Glasgow seats. Now that's really quite a turn up for the books there, and that would really put the kibosh on the SNP if that were to happen. And what that means is that we really do need to start taking seriously the possibility that the Labour Party will win the British general election. And if it were to win the British general election, then we need to take seriously whatever plans it has got for Britain. Okay. Because I've said before, like them or lump them, one thing that Labour does is it always comes in with a programme of change, and it makes it happen, and it makes it happen very fast. Unlike the Conservative Party, who come in with no plans for anything, and they sit about, and then 6 months before they're about to lose, they think maybe we ought to come up with a few choice words here to pretend we're doing something. And I'm not being anti-Tory, I'm just reflecting with the fact of the two differences between the parties. Labour believe that they're the party that has to be radical and change things, and the Tories get in and say, how can we stop things getting worse if we can be bothered to even do that? So Labour will have a plan and they will enact it. So what is it that they're planning to enact? Well, I'll get to that in a moment, but oh my gosh, you need to take a deep breath. Amai says, who do you all vote for, if you don't mind me asking? Well, I think Unionists vote for all parties and none. It's not as if there's a particular party that people who are for the UK are going to vote for. And some of us vote tactically as well. This chap here says the SNP will go the way of the Parti Québécois in Canada, reduced to a minority based on an irrelevant issue. That would be a nice thought. However, as I'm about to show you, the Labour Party is doing everything that it possibly can to make sure that it never becomes an irrelevant issue, but in fact stays a very relevant, divisive issue. And I'll get to that in a moment. Because Labour will, as they did in 2024, throw away the win. When I say Labour did it in 2024, they did it in conjunction with the other parties at the time. Christopher says, what we know, which is the Scotnats really do have a problem with the English, a massive inferiority complex. And that's right, Stephen says Scotland's railways are already under the Scottish Government control. Yeah, good point. Derek says time for Holyrood to be scrapped. Well, I read, so that you don't have to, Gordon Brown's report on how he's going to mess up the United Kingdom, and he's called it renewing our democracy and rebuilding our economy, which is a long-winded way of saying, I better not say it, this is a family show, but you know what, that's a long-winded way of meaning. And I think I must be the only person in probably Britain who's waded through Gordon Brown's report here, perhaps other than his mother and his wife, who probably told him that she read it but never actually did. Anyway, this is what he's going to present to Keir Starmer if Keir Starmer wins, and this is what they're going to do. Now, a lot of it is written in that kind of Labourite style that says a lot without saying anything, that uses fancy words about making things better but doesn't really explain how they're going to go about doing that. But when he gets into specifics, it's regarding the Constitution and what they're going to do for the Constitution, which is very much, as always, focused on appeasing the squeaking separatists. It's about trying to answer their issues. It's not about trying to strengthen the United Kingdom. It's not about speaking up for the majority of people in Scotland who want to keep the UK together. It's about how can we try to appease the squeaking separatists so that they don't squeak anymore. Of course, that's a fruitless task. Utterly fruitless, pointless task. Okay, so there's no respect in this report for the Unionist position. there's no respect agenda, and that's what I'm going to start talking about. The respect agenda for unionism. In this report, there's no respect agenda for unionism. It's all about how do we appease the squeaking separatists. Of course, he doesn't put it in those words, but that's what's underlying the reason why all of this is being put together. And I can assure you, virtually everything that he's talking about here to appease the squeaking separatists will, of course, only make matters considerably worse. Now, one or two lazy assumptions also underlie what he's talking about here. One of the lazy assumptions is that people want more powers devolved to Holyrood, because apparently he phoned around his friends and he discovered that that's what people want. Well, you know, perhaps that's how they responded to the question. If you ask somebody, do you think Holyrood should have more powers? You know, many people might say yes. However, if you ask them, do you want more powers devolved to Holyrood, if the consequence of that would make it easier to break up the UK, then you'll probably find that you get a slightly different answer. Maybe people don't want more powers devolved if the consequence is going to be strengthening the Scottish National Party. You know what I mean? So it's a lazy assumption to say people want more powers. Another lazy assumption, which I've been hearing all my life, is that government closer to the people is better for the people. And that's one of these assumptions that sounds as if it would probably be correct. But it starts to break down when you start to actually think about that. I mean, for example, what do you mean close? How close is close? Okay, Westminster for me is 415 miles away. Holyrood is 47 miles away. The Glasgow Council Chambers is, I don't know, a mile away or something like that. And it's Glasgow Council Chambers is closest to me, right? On the 1st of June, they're going to bring in the ULEZ system in Glasgow, which is going to make my life difficult because it's going to stop me being able to get a taxi as easily as I used to get a taxi. And it's going to make other people's troubles difficult when their cars are not suitable for getting into the city centre. So how is that government, which is like 1 mile away from me, how is that being better for me? Okay, I'm a local person to that seat of government, but it's not making government better for me on that particular issue. Okay? Holyrood's 47 miles away. Well, there's plenty of stuff Holyrood's doing that's not good for me. Well, what if you just lived outside Holyrood? There's a few council houses just outside Holyrood. Does that mean that the people in council houses have like the best government in the world because they literally walk out their door onto the front of Holyrood? No. Their government is just the same as mine. Doesn't matter. Proximity is not an issue here. And even though the British government, the seat of the British government is 415 miles away, it's making better laws on some issues than Holyrood is making. So the idea that, just because it's close to the government, that government is better the closer it is to you, that's not necessarily true. And what if all the people close to you are all like idiots as well, and the only clever people are far away? Then that has an impact as well. Sometimes you might want the people who are a few miles away in the next town who are a little bit cleverer. Maybe you want them making the laws, not the people in your particular village. You know what I mean? So it's what a lazy assumption. And this is a guy who used to be a prime minister. Oh, government's better because it's closer to the people. It's all just lazy assumptions. Anyway, the crux of what he's going to do is he's going to abolish the House of Lords. Now, make no mistake, if Labour get in, they are going to abolish the House of Lords because they do what they say. And they're not going to have a referendum about it because that's too long drawn out and that's too protracted. They're not going to have a referendum about it. They're just going to do it. And what are you and I going to do? What can we do about that? Nothing. Okay, we've elected them. And they'll say, oh, that's what we said we'd do. If you read that small print in our manifesto, we said we were going to abolish the House of Lords. Now, I know that the House of Lords does need reform. Don't get me wrong, it does need reform around certain issues. However, wait till you hear about the reform that they're going to bring in. They're going to abolish the House of Lords, and they're going to replace it with an elected, what they're going to call Assembly of the Nations and Regions. Now, the nations in this regard are Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. And the regions are the regions of England. Now, I don't know what regions or how they're going to splice up England, but there's probably going to be at least 9 of them, I should imagine. It'll follow the regions that the European Union identified, no doubt. And so they're going to have those regions of England plus Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And they're going to call it the Assembly of the Nations and Regions, or a Senate of the 3 nations and several regions of England. And just think about this, right? Because right now the House of Lords is appointed. So this time they're going to be elected, and they're going to elect representatives. They haven't decided how many, and they haven't decided how they will be elected. But if it was to say by first past the post, although they'll probably have a proportional representation system, but who knows, it's going to end up essentially as a mirror image of the House of Commons. It's going to be, Scotland's going to have about the same proportion of senators representing the SNP, around about the same proportion representing Labour, same proportion representing Tory and Lib Dems as in the House of Commons. Wales is going to have the same number of Labour Party senators, Tory senators, Green Plaid senators, and so on. It's just going to be a mirror image of the lower house. And all the problems that afflict the lower house are going to be mirrored in the upper house in this elected Senate. And how is that going to be better? That's just doubling the aggravation. That's all that's doing, doubling the aggravation. And here's an important point as well, from a unionist perspective. Right now, whatever you may think about the House of Lords, it's a modest, a quietly unionist house, because people there don't claim to represent the nation states within the United Kingdom. They don't claim to be there on behalf of Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland or England. They're simply there as Lords in the House of Lords, given their considered opinion on whatever. There's no national basis in the upper house at the moment. But what Brown is going to do is he's going to transform what's a quietly, modestly unionist house. He's going to transform it into an explicitly nationalist body. And he even uses this phrase here on interminable page 145. And I can only read this if I go outside and sit in the park with some medication, quite frankly. But I managed to get to page 145, and he says, the second chamber must be democratically legitimate, blah, 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 and different in composition from the Commons, chosen on a different electoral cycle, meaning not in the same year as the general election, and it should, quote, represent the nations and regions of the UK in a very explicit way. Okay, so it should represent the nations, which is to say Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and the regions of England in a very explicit way. Explicit way. In other words, he's going to transform a quietly, nominally unionist House of Lords into an explicitly nationalist and regionalist Senate. How is that possibly a unionist proposition? That's a divisive separatist proposition. An absolute nightmare. That's what they're going to do. They're going to keep lots of this quiet until they get elected, because that's a vote loser if ever I saw a vote loser. Don't get me wrong, I do believe that the House of Lords needs reform in some way, especially the cronyism and the nepotism in there is awful. It definitely does need reform, but transforming it into this explicitly nationalist body is going to do nothing except fire up all the animosity again. Just when Labour starts to beat the SNP, what does it do? It hands them a gift where the SNP can use the upper house in order to start promoting its nationalist agenda again. Now, that's coming, so that's coming. Now, we've got a guest at the bottom of the hour, and before we get to our guest, I'm going to do this day in British history, and then we're going to ask you a question on that, and the winner will get this King Charles badge. Please do send your answers to contact@aforceforgood.uk. Now, on this day in British history, the 24th of May in 1153, the king, the quote, King of Scotland and England, David I, passed away. Now, people think of David I as simply the King of Scots, and that's how I was thinking about him, but I notice he's actually been called the King of Scotland and England by a historical document, and I'll get to that in a moment. But David I was born in 1084, and he was the younger brother of Alexander I of Scots. And they were the sons of Malcolm III and the English princess of Wessex called Margaret. And we've got a nice wee picture here of Malcolm and Margaret. And there they are there. And I like these wee paintings. These paintings are from the Seaton Armorial, which is a book from the 16th century, which really does need to be reprinted, because what this Seaton Armorial does is it has all the kings and queens of Scotland in these nice little quirky cartoons. And anyway, that was David's mother and father. Note, she was English. Okay, and David was a close associate of Henry I of England, and David's sister Matilda of Scotland married Henry I. So Henry I was David's brother-in-law. English king married to a Scottish princess. So that's what I like about all of that period as well. There's a lot of Scottish-English bonding going on. And when Henry I passed away, his daughter, who was also called Matilda, wanted to be the queen, and argy-bargy and fighting broke out, and David took advantage of that by invading England, which he did several times invaded England, and basically set up what's called the Scoto-Northumbria realm, where he claimed kingship, at least going right down into England. Hence why he's gone down in history, in at least one history book, as claiming to be the king of both Scotland and England. Although, of course, the English kings at the time would have something to say about that. Anyway, he was a busy man. Between invading England, he also got the time to set up the royal borough of Edinburgh and various other towns and villages throughout Scotland. And he also set up St Giles Cathedral as well. He established St Giles Cathedral. There's a picture of him, a statue of him here, actually outside the entrance to St Giles Cathedral. There he is there. It's actually a small statue just above the doorway of St Giles Cathedrals. Have a look for him next time you're up there. And today he's buried in Dunfermline Abbey. So that was David I on this day, died in 1153. Our guest is Ash, that Preston journalist. Please say a big hello to Ash. Good evening,
Alistair.
Ash.
Evening, everybody.
Great stuff. How are you doing tonight, Ash?
I'm good, yeah, you?
Yeah, pretty well. You've had a busy day on YouTube. I noticed you've put out several videos today on various matters. What's been your most successful video that you've put out today?
I'm not really sure, to be honest with you. What was there was the earlier one about Peter Wishart, who's managed to make an absolute idiot of himself once again. His latest tweet, which was picked up by Wings Over Scotland, shows him attacking not just Unionists now, but also attacking independence supporters as well. Which were absolute lunacy from a guy that only won his seat last time by 21 votes. And he's basically said that whether it's Albert, whether it's Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, he said that they're all wrong to support the Union. They're all backing Labour, but they shouldn't be backing Labour because the Labour and the Tories are as one, and Labour still has to promote its, I think his words were, the hard Brexit Conservative agenda over the rest of Scotland, and convince those people to vote for them. So, that guy, honestly.
Well, it's absolutely incredible that he is an MP, and he, as you say, he just barely scraped in as well, and he beat what would have been a good Tory candidate as well. It's ridiculous that a place like Perth, for crying out loud, has got somebody like Pete Wishart representing them. But what good thing about it is that they're all falling out like rats in a sack, or whatever the expression is.
Yeah.
And the all under one banner people have got a march planned for the 24th of June in Stirling. And on the same day, the SNP have called a conference for all its supporters in Dundee, I think, actually, of all places, about Indy. So they're fighting against each other now about that, which is funny because that's going to take supporters away from the march, and so it's all good. It's all good to see all of that. And it was.
I think that's brilliant. Sorry to carry on.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think that's brilliant. I think it really shows up the SNP and their true motives towards this. It's not about breaking up the UK. It's not about getting Scotland separate from the rest of the UK. It's simply about keeping their own taxpayer-funded lifestyles by trying to galvanise an ever-decreasing voter base, and that's what they're doing at the moment. If they really cared about independence, they'd invite people like the Greens, they'd invite the Alba Party, they'd invite the all under one banner people all to this one conference and galvanise the entire Yes campaign together, but no. It's just going to be them trying to promote themselves and trying to hang on to their seats, and that's what it's all about, and that's what it's always, in my opinion, been about.
I think you're right there. There was an article, a big interview actually, in the Herald on Sunday 2 weeks ago with one of the people who had been working for the Yes campaign during 2014, and of course we were told that the Yes campaign was a cross-party group of ordinary people, grassroots people in Scotland who were concerned for, democracy and for independence and all that kind of stuff. And this was an insider, somebody called Drummond, who I never heard of before. And he was interviewed at length saying that, on the contrary, the Yes campaign was very tightly controlled by the SNP. And the SNP did not want any other party muscling in on its action. And from the SNP's point of view, that's perfectly understandable. But what's surprising is that people actually would believe that it was anything other than that. It was obviously an SNP front. They were raising all the money for it. They were the spokesman for it. And that's always going to be the case, and it has to be the case because if they allow the grassroots to lead the independence campaign, you'll have this utter collection of William Wallace lookalikes. People living in the 14th century, rabid anti-English people, and just general fruitcakes. And so the SNP have to keep a lid on all of that, and they have to say no, we're going to be the sole voice. So whether they like it or not, the SNP's always going to lead that cause.
Oh yeah, and they'll always have a voice as well, and they will always manage to galvanise a certain amount of support. But even if, like I heard you mention in the polls before, ever since Yusuf took over, it's been going even worse than when Sturgeon was in charge, and she managed to make herself pretty unpopular by the end. And ever since then, the polls are still dropping. What is it now? Something like 23 MPs are looking at losing. They're under attack from both sides, and even the latest poll that I saw had the Tories up 4 points in Scotland. Now, they're still well behind Labour and the SNP, don't get me wrong, but given that these seats that the Tories are looking to gain, although they would lose Moray apparently, they're still looking at gaining Angus, Argyll and Bute, Gordon, South, North and Perthshire. South and North Perthshire and Perth itself. So that's a lot of seats to lose. And then Labour, as you said as well, are looking at gaining pretty much all the central belt. So they're going to lose. The only area the SNP have ironically tried to put money into is the central belt, because that's all they care about. But now they're looking at losing that as well. They're under serious pressure here, and although no one's talking about it at the moment, Yusuf himself is going to come under some serious pressure soon, because people are going to start worrying for their seats. They're going to start thinking, oh, I'm going to be out of a job soon if we don't get a new leader. But as you know, in the next 12 to 18 months, we're all going to be going to the polls for a general election. And they're all going to be very, very scared about losing their incomes and their taxpayer-funded lifestyles.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, very much so. Very much so. And they are going to lose it. And a lot of these people, it's not like they can actually do very much else in life. It's, they landed on their feet. And it's fairly easy to become an SNP MP. You just need to join the local SNP branch and be somebody that's, can string a few sentences together. And if you read the newspaper or something like that, you stand out. It's like, oh my goodness, this guy is incredible. So they put you up and you get elected. It's not like you have to really get elected on the strength of your own ability. It's just
no, exactly.
It's just because you're using that party's banner. So it's an easy thing to do, and none of these people will get that kind of salary in the private sector, or not.
Never again.
Yeah, not even the public sector. They would struggle. Absolute sinecure.
I mean, look at Mary Black. She's younger than me. What's she ever done in life to warrant representing thousands of people in a constituency? And who's the other one? Is it Blackman? Is it Kirsty Blackman? Is that her name? I think she's younger than me. What's she ever done in life? What life experience do these people have? Really, absolutely nothing. Like you said, going into the private sector again and going into the real world like the rest of us and trying to earn a living, they've got absolutely no chance.
No. They're just quite good gift to the gab kind of type people. They can talk well, I think, and that's how they get noticed.
Like you said, they don't even need ability, do they?
No.
It's so easy, or it was in the past anyway, so easy to be elected under Salmond and under Sturgeon, because I suppose the cause, if you like, was in the ascendancy. But now that's all gone now. That's done. They've reached peak SNP, as it were, and now they're just on the decline.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be as easy anymore.
No, it's not. Unless, as I said, the Labour Party or the Conservatives give them something that will allow them to exploit again. Now, I was reading this, and I can just develop it a wee bit more, but I was reading this document by Gordon Brown and his so-called think tank on this matter. And basically, they are going to give more powers. They haven't specified what powers they're going to give, but they are going to give more powers to the SNP But one of the things that they have specified is that they're going to make foreign policy something that is largely going to be devolved to Scotland as well. So again, that's a major, major international role that the SNP, and it will be the SNP, will be able to exploit. Now, you see, Gordon Brown thinks that, eventually Labour will be able to get elected somehow and exploit these powers, and it'll be Labour that will be in charge. But, that's very much wishful thinking at the moment. The British general election is different from the Scottish general election. I don't know, but my own view is that the SNP and Greens are going to tend to dominate for a long while anyway. Lots of things are going to have to change, but the SNP and Greens will tend to dominate, and you need to plan for that, and then just hope, of course, that you win, but expect that you're probably not, at least for a while. And so when Gordon Brown says he's given these powers to people, what that means is he's given the powers to the SNP and the Greens.
Yeah,
that's what he's given it to. And so if you give these groups more power, they will use it against you. They're going to use this foreign policy. If he does devolve foreign policy, or large elements of foreign policy, what he's saying is he's going to allow Scotland to have its own trade commissioners and all that kind of stuff, basically giving it all to Scotland. That's weakening the British economy. It's weakening the cohesiveness of a British economy entirely. It's all bad. So he's going to do that. He's going to create a nationalistic Senate at the heart of the democracy as well, which is going to be a huge playground for the nationalists, a huge playground. The SNP are not even in the House of Lords at the moment, okay? I don't know if people have entirely clocked that, but the SNP don't go to the House of Lords. So at least the House of Lords the SNP are at least absent from the second chamber in the House of Lords at the moment. But he's going to not only bring them in, he's going to centre them in there as basically the Scottish voice.
Look what happened in the Roman Senate. It'll be exactly like that, won't it? Eventually they all tore each other to pieces. And that's what will happen here, isn't it?
Yeah, that's actually quite a good point. But the thing is, they'll bring us all down with them. That's the upsetting thing. They'll bring us all down at the same time. And so he's going to do all of those things. And I really need to write an article on that just to list it so people understand what all of this means. Because, he's capitalising on the idea, and that report's capitalising on the idea that people are fed up with British democracy. There's problems with it, and there absolutely are. And we're losing trust in politicians. We're all losing trust in politicians for a variety of reasons, not all of which are the same reasons that Gordon Brown's losing trust in politicians. But we're all losing trust in that area. So there is an issue there that needs to be addressed, but I'm not sure that Brown has got the answers. I mean, look at the situation with Suella Braverman, for example. I don't know if you've got an opinion on that. And what's happened with them trying to get... Well, I don't know, what do you think they're trying to do to her?
Trying to destroy her. This is another example, in my opinion, of Dominic Raab, Boris Johnson again. They keep going after them for different things, and Raab has now turned around and said that he's not standing in the next election. Personally, I don't blame him. I think he's been bullied out of his job under bogus charges, and now Suella Braverman is the next one, because she's the only one in that cabinet, I think, who can actually call herself a Conservative. She speaks on behalf of a lot more people than most of them inside Westminster when she talks about illegal immigration, toughening up on it, stopping people bringing the dependents over here, stuff like that. She is a threat to Rishi Sunak, and she's a threat to Jeremy Hunt and people like that, because she doesn't believe what they believe. And the civil service also don't believe what she believes. But the civil service are probably happy with Rishi, who's more of a globalist anyway, and Jeremy Hunt, so they're happy to let them two carry on. But Suella Braverman, because she's outspoken, is now they're trying to slowly destroy her. And I think Rishi Sunak would have happily sacked her as well. But I believe he saw a backlash coming down the road. He's been told by people that if you get rid of Suella Braverman, who's one of the only true Brexiteers left in this Conservative Party, then we're going to rebel against you, and we'll make sure that you are brought down if you try and bring her down. And then I think she would be next in line, in my opinion, to take over the leadership of the Conservative Party if Rishi Sunak was gotten rid of.
Well, that's an interesting thought. Is the Blob afraid of her because she's a potential leader?
Oh, certainly, yes. She would be
yeah.
a proper Conservative leader. You know, I know she divides opinion, but she reminds me of a modern day Margaret Thatcher. She's a very tough woman. She's a strong woman. She knows what she believes, and a lot of people don't like that. I'm afraid they just think you should just go with the mould. And a lot of politicians get into government and they're afraid to speak out against the civil service or speak out against their own party because they just want to climb the greasy pole and get the more glamorous ministerial job titles. I mean, she's got a big one anyway, hasn't she, in Foreign Secretary? But sorry, is it Home Secretary? But she will. She's happy to speak out, and she's happy to put her job on the line and speak out against Rishi Sunak, Jeremy Hunt, and the Conservative Party if necessary, because they're not doing their job. And whatever they're telling us, people like Jeremy Hunt, I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them. And if you look at the popularity ratings, neither would the public either.
Yeah. No. Good point. And it just shows the power that they've got, along with the media, of just going after, picking people out one by one, and just making life so difficult for them that they have to stand down. And that's like a hidden government that we've got. And that's also one of the reasons why people are losing faith, because there's a feeling that the politicians often are not in charge, or at least they're not seem to be behaving as if they're in charge. And if they are, there's nothing that they can do. I remember talking to somebody who's very closely associated with politicians, who's an advisor for an MEP, as it happened, and he said to me that he had met a cabinet minister once in his life, and this cabinet minister had said to him, "Look, I'm sitting here in the office and I've got all the levers. The only problem is they're not connected to anything." And that seems like what these politicians are. They seem to have the levers of power, but the levers are not working, because once they start to crank them, then they find that there's these civil servants stuck in the cogs, and they're not allowing anything to move forward. And
they just find work for each other, don't they? That's the problem here. They don't. How many civil servants have you known get sacked for COVID breaches, for attending parties in Downing Street, etc.? Not a single one. But of course, any conservative politician is dragged over hot coals. I heard a fantastic example the other day, and I forget his name now. The man who was in charge, he was First Lord of the Admiralty in World War II, and obviously we had a big navy then. And they had a certain amount of staff to run and make sure all the ships were fully manned and all the rest of it. In 1955, 10 years after World War II ended, he was brought back in to be some sort of consultant for the Admiralty once again. It turned out that we had next to no navy left, but the Admiralty had 3 times the amount of staff that it had during World War II. I mean, that just sums up our civil service and how many of them there are, and they really believe that although they're unelected, they believe they've got the right to dictate government policy ahead of the government of the day and the people that are actually elected by the people of this country. They've got far too big for their boots.
Yeah. I was thinking about that today, and I was like, well, what's the problem? And there's a couple of blokes who have identified a problem. One of them is David Frost, also known as Lord Frost, and he's got this article here. It's civil servants, not ministers, who run things. And that's I've been filing that. That's from last year, 16th of December last year, 2022. And he said something here which I thought was interesting. He goes, "The truth is that our current arrangements are out of date. The Northcote Trevelyan model for government dates from the Victorian era, when departments were a handful of people all drawn from the same small group of society. It needs change." And I thought, what's that Northcote Trevelyan model? And then another article this year, "The Brexit revolt against the Remain establishment has only just begun," by somebody called Alistair Heath. And he says, he's talking about Boris Johnson. He says he failed to smash the obsolete Northcote Trevelyan civil service when he had the opportunity. And I thought, that's that phrase again, Northcote Trevelyan. I'll add that to my Northcote Trevelyan file. And so today I looked up, what's this Northcote Trevelyan? And apparently it was the Northcote Trevelyan Report, was a document prepared by Stafford Northcote and C.E. Trevelyan about the British civil service. Commissioned in 1853 and published in 1854, it formed the basis for the principle of an impartial civil service. So basically it's the model that the civil service has been getting run on since 1854. And we live in an absolutely different period of time now. And so I don't know what needs to be done to the Heathcote Trevelyan model, I might say, but I think someone knows, and in which case they need to lay it out in detail what is to be done, and then the Tory government presumably needs to write out what they're going to do about it, and then put that in their manifesto, and then if they get elected, they need to do it, and they need to create a new model of a civil service. And I say that, I mean, I may as well be talking to the wind, which I possibly am, because the Tories will never do something as intelligent and as logical and as thought out as that. What will happen is they'll get elected, they'll sit about for 5 years, and then a month before the general election they'll go, we should have done something about the Northcote Trevelyan system, but we couldn't even be asked to get round to it, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So that's, you can forget about that. But Labour will come in and they'll probably make it worse. So
yeah, anyway, even bigger.
Yeah, they'll make it even bigger because, of course, the public sector. And, of course, that's where the jobs for all the boys and girls can be found.
No, that's it, exactly. The only solution I could possibly think of, and I'm not sure it'd work, is if each government, when they came in, brought in their own people to run the departments. Obviously, it'd have to be people who've got the relevant qualifications, knew what they were doing, etc. And then at the top, you could have a few people like Simon Case and the rest of them, permanent civil servants, but just a handful of them over each department, and then the people actually doing the work, actually putting the policies forward, were people that belong to that party. And then maybe you'd get some sort of, if it was Labour, you'd get their agenda. If it was the Tories, you'd get a Tory agenda. That's the only way I could possibly think of it. But the current system is just doesn't work.
No, and I can't see how it can work, really. I said I don't know what needs to be done about it, but just this article here also popped up again by Alistair Heath saying the real reason the right lost, by which he means the Tories, and surrendered Britain to technocrats. And he says in it, he goes, the civil service must be reformed, and it's just what you've been saying here. Democratically elected politicians should be allowed to appoint hundreds of outside specialists, as is the case in France and America.
Yeah, that's right.
I didn't know that. The Home Office must be liquidated and a new ministry reconstructed from scratch. Ministers, I like this, need to hire managers who understand how to push through change. Quangos must be absorbed into ministries and no part of the government must be allowed to campaign against it. The blob thrives on bad or misunderstood legislation. So, yeah, bringing in people from the private sector who know how to make things happen. That's. I've always thought that. I've always thought it's ridiculous that you have, like, say, a health secretary who knows literally nothing about health, who doesn't know anything about that industry, and then you give him 6 months in the job, and then he has to go off and he becomes the defence secretary, and the guy's never so much as read a Commando comic, let alone got any idea about geopolitics or how missiles work or anything. So it's astonishing how we're still here today as a species, quite frankly. Anyway, if it was left to you and me, Ash, maybe one day it will be, who knows? But if it was, we'd get stuff sorted out. But we'd have to sort out the blob first, because none of the blob would want to work for us, that's for sure.
But you just raised a fantastic point there. Ben Wallace, fair enough, he's been in the military, so he's got a certain degree of understanding, but the rest of him, have never worked in banking, but they become the Chancellor, etc., and all the rest of the other posts, never worked in health, but they're a health secretary. That's probably half the problem. They're relying on these civil servants who've worked in these departments, and their dad probably worked in the department, and their granddad probably worked in there before them, and that they're just relying on them to give them all the information, and then, because they don't have any experience whatsoever, they've got to go along with everything they're told, and they've got no brains or knowledge or experience to question it, have they?
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Well, I think I remember that was last year. Jeremy Hunt, who I think was the health secretary at the time, or whenever he was the health secretary, he said
a few
later,
years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, he said later that people were writing to him, complaining about what was happening to the granny or whatever, but he wasn't seeing any of the letters.
No.
They were all just going to civil servants who were not passing anything on. So he actually made a wee rule that every day he wanted at least one of those letters on his desk so he could at least see it.
The Tory MP, Andrea Jenkin, appeared yesterday, and I don't know if it was Talk TV or GB News, one of them. And she was talking about the civil servants, and she was saying how that when she was in, I think it was education briefly, when she was there, she said they hid things from her. She never managed to actually get meetings with people she wanted to get meetings with. Apparently she wanted to go and meet people like J.K. Rowling, etc., and she was barred from doing that. They literally tried to stop her doing anything. It's very Yes Minister, isn't it, and Yes Prime Minister. That's exactly what it really is. And they tried to stop her doing anything she wanted to do, and eventually she said it was so soul-destroying that she just left the department after a few months, because she just said, this is... You know what? I can't get anything done anyway. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. Ash, thanks very much for coming on the show. It's the top of the hour almost. As always, I suggest that people go and follow you on twitter.com/AKWriting88, and your youtube.com, which always does very well, is youtube.com/that Preston Journalist, all one word. And so, Ash, well said, Ash, says TC there. Thanks very much. Let's get you on again.
Yeah.
As soon as we can. We've got guests for the next couple of weeks at least, and at least 3 weeks actually, but we'll get you on after that sometime. Anything you want to say to the viewers just before we sign off?
Well, just thanks all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll be back on as soon as Alistair wants me back on.
Good stuff. Folks, check out Ash, that Preston Journalist, on YouTube.
Yeah,
good night,
cheers.
Ash.
Thank you all. See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good stuff. Ash, that Preston Journalist, a fantastic man on YouTube and on Twitter. Thank you, Ash, says Alan Dawes. And Catherine says, thanks, Ash, well done. I just wanted to emphasise that we actually were out at the weekend with one of our Coronation Street stalls. Now, we've got some photographs of that. They went very well. And there's the boys. There were 6 of us British legends. The 6th took the photograph. Check that out. That's a keeper, that picture. That's going in, I'm going to say we're going to put that in issue 11 of Union Heart. Issue 10 will be out sometime late July, but no, issue 9 will be out in late July, and I think we'll put that on the front page of issue 10. That's what I'm thinking at the moment. Classic. That's a photograph of our table with one of our magazines, and that's our big flag up there, and that's why we're calling it a Coronation Street stall. And okay, people pass and they're like, they don't necessarily come up, but a lot of people pass and they're like looking up at what are the flags, and that in itself is really good. That's raising the profile of Britishness, which is one of the aims of A Force for Good. So if you like what we're doing but you can't come out with us, please do at least follow our social media platforms, and if you can, please become a monthly donor at our Union supporters link, which is so important for us, which is aforceforgood.uk/union-supporters. as well as checking out our shop where you can get everything, including our magazines, because that's what keeps us going. Thanks very much. Thank you very much for all your support, and thanks for all the comments. Thanks to Kevin, says lovely chat, guys. He's a great person to have on the show, is Ash. Debbie says good to see you, Ash. TC says thanks, and Christopher says great analysis as usual, and Alan says great setup. Well done, you proud Brits. Yes, it is a great setup, the street stall. It really is. Great stuff. Thanks to everybody who comes out. Folks, it's been a blast. We will be back next Wednesday with our show, so it just remains for me to say God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next week.